The auction block stood in the center of Canon City, Colorado, under a merciless August sun in 1878, and Victoria Sutton knew with absolute certainty that her brother was about to sell her like livestock. She had watched Thomas negotiate with the weathered cowboy for 20 minutes now, gesturing toward her as if she were nothing more than property, his eyes glinting with the same greed that had consumed him since their parents died 6 months ago. The cowboy stood silent and unmoving, his broad-brimmed hat casting shadows across a face she could not quite see, his dusty leather boots planted firmly in the dirt, as if he had all the time in the world. Victoria's hands trembled against the rough rope binding her wrists, the hemp fibers cutting into her skin with each slight movement, and she wondered how her life had come to this moment, standing in the August heat, while her own flesh and blood bartered her away for a horse and saddle. Thomas had always been weak, but she had never imagined he would sink this low. Their father had left them the small ranch outside town, a modest spread with enough cattle to keep them comfortable if they worked hard and managed carefully. But Thomas had discovered gambling and whiskey in equal measure, and within months he had lost nearly everything to card games and bad investments. The cattle were sold off one by one, the land mortgaged to men with hard eyes and harder terms, and finally, when there was nothing left to lose, Thomas had turned his attention to the only asset he still possessed. "She is strong and healthy," Thomas was saying now, his voice carrying across the dusty square. "Good worker, knows how to cook and clean, never gives trouble. Worth more than just a horse, I would say." The cowboy tilted his head slightly, and Victoria caught a glimpse of his profile. He was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps 25 or 26, with a strong jaw darkened by several days of stubble and features that might have been handsome under different circumstances. His clothes were worn but well maintained, his gun belt sitting low on his hips in the manner of someone who knew how to use the weapon it carried. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and measured, with a slight drawl that marked him as someone who had spent considerable time in Texas, or perhaps further south. "I am not in the market for a slave," he said quietly. "Colorado is a free territory, and this is 1878, not 1858. What you are proposing is illegal." Thomas laughed, a harsh sound that made Victoria flinch. "She is my sister, not a slave. I have every right to arrange a marriage or employment for her. She is 20 years old and unmarried, a burden I can no longer afford. If you want that paint stallion and the saddle I showed you, this is the price. Simple as that." Victoria felt her stomach turn at the casual way Thomas discussed her fate. The paint stallion he referred to had belonged to their father, a magnificent animal with unusual markings that made it valuable to breeders and ranchers alike. The saddle was custom-made Mexican leather, worth a small fortune on its own. Together, they represented more wealth than Thomas had seen in months, and she understood now why he had been so eager to bring her to town this morning, why he had insisted she wear her best dress and fix her hair properly. The cowboy was silent for a long moment, his gaze moving from Thomas to Victoria and back again. She tried to read his expression, to understand what he was thinking, but his face revealed nothing. Finally, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch, weighing it in his hand as if considering his options. "I will give you $20 in gold for her freedom papers," he said. "Not for her, but for legal documentation that releases her from any obligation to you. I want her brother rights terminated, everything proper and witnessed by the law." Thomas scowled. "The horse and saddle are worth 10 times that amount." "Then find another buyer," the cowboy replied, his tone unchanged. "I suspect you will have difficulty locating anyone willing to purchase a human being in broad daylight in front of the courthouse. The sheriff might take an interest in such a transaction." Victoria watched her brother's face cycle through several emotions, anger and frustration warring with desperate calculation. She knew he needed money immediately, that he had debts coming due that would result in violence if not paid. The cowboy seemed to know it too, and he waited patiently while Thomas worked through his limited options. $50, Thomas countered. "And you take her off my hands permanently. I want nothing more to do with her." 25, the cowboy said, And I want documentation. 40. 25 is my final offer. Take it now, or I walk away and you can explain to the sheriff why you have your sister tied up in the town square. Thomas glanced around nervously, and Victoria followed his gaze. A small crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the unusual nature of the negotiation. Several women whispered behind their hands, their faces showing shock and disapproval. A man in a suit and bowler hat watched with narrowed eyes, his hand resting on what looked like a badge pinned to his vest. The sheriff, Victoria realized, or perhaps a deputy. Fine, Thomas spat. $25 and good riddance. But I want the money now, and we do this proper with a lawyer, so she cannot come back claiming I owe her anything from the estate. The cowboy nodded once. Agreed. There is a lawyer's office across the street. We can handle this immediately. The next hour passed in a blur of legal language and signatures. The lawyer, a thin man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers, drew up papers that Victoria barely understood. The cowboy paid him an additional $5 to ensure everything was documented correctly, and Thomas signed away all familial rights and obligations with an eagerness that broke something inside Victoria's chest. When it was finished, Thomas took his $25 in gold coins, counted them twice, and walked out of the office without looking back at his sister. The cowboy waited until Thomas had disappeared down the street before he turned to Victoria. Up close, she could see that his eyes were a startling shade of blue-gray, like storm clouds over the mountains. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folding knife, and for a moment Victoria felt a spike of fear, but he simply cut through the ropes, binding her wrists with one quick motion. You are free to go, he said simply, folding the knife and returning it to his pocket. The papers say you have no legal obligation to anyone. I have no claim on you, and neither does your brother. You can do whatever you want. Victoria rubbed her wrists where the rope had left angry red marks. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The cowboy seemed to understand her confusion, and he gestured toward the door. There is a boarding house 2 streets over, he said. The woman who runs it is decent and fair. Tell her Jack Sadler sent you, and she will give you a room and meals while you figure out your next move. I will pay for a week in advance. Why? Victoria finally managed to ask, her voice rough from hours of silent fear. Why did you do this? You could have walked away. You could have let Thomas find someone else, someone who would have actually taken him up on his offer. Jack Sadler was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. I had a sister once, he said finally. She was sold off by our stepfather when she was 16 to pay his gambling debts. Died 2 years later, worked to death by the man who bought her. I swore then that if I ever had the chance to stop it from happening to someone else, I would. Today I had that chance. Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. She had cried enough in the past months, and she refused to break down now in front of this stranger who had shown her more kindness than her own brother. I have no money to repay you, she said. I have nothing at all except the clothes I am wearing. I am not asking for repayment, Jack said. He picked up his hat from the lawyer's desk and settled it on his head. Come on, let me show you where the boarding house is, and then I have business to attend to. Victoria followed him out into the late afternoon sunshine. Canon City was bustling with activity, wagons rolling down the main street, horses tied to hitching posts, outside saloons and general stores, people going about their daily business without any awareness of the transaction that had just taken place. Jack led her through the crowds with easy confidence, nodding to a few people who greeted him, clearly a known figure in town despite his claim of having business to attend to. The boarding house was a 2-story structure painted white with blue shutters, well-maintained and respectable looking. A sign hung above the door reading Calloway House Clean Rooms and Good Meals. Jack knocked once and then entered without waiting for a response. A woman in her 50s looked up from where she was arranging flowers in a vase on the front desk. She had gray streaked brown hair pulled back in a neat bun and sharp eyes that assessed Victoria in a single glance. Jack Sadler, she said warmly. I heard you were back in town. Did you find what you were looking for down in New Mexico? I did, Mrs. Calloway, Jack replied. I need a favor. This is Victoria Sutton. She needs a room for a week, maybe longer. I will cover the costs. Mrs. Calloway's expression shifted, her welcoming smile fading into something more serious as she took in Victoria's disheveled appearance and the marks on her wrists. I heard there was some trouble in the square today, she said quietly. Word travels fast in a town this size. That brother of yours should be horsewhipped, if you will pardon me saying so, Miss Sutton. Victoria felt her face flush, but Mrs. Calloway's tone held sympathy rather than judgment. Thank you, she said. I appreciate any help you can offer. Room 6, second floor. Faces the back garden so it is quiet, Mrs. Calloway said immediately. Dinner is at 6, breakfast at 7. You look like you could use a bath. I will have my daughter bring up hot water and some clean clothes that might fit you. We can worry about payment and such later, Jack. You know I trust you. Jack nodded his thanks and turned back to Victoria. You will be safe here, he said. Mrs. Calloway runs a respectable establishment, and she does not tolerate any trouble from her boarders or anyone else. If you need anything, you can leave a message for me at the livery stable down the street. I am staying there while I finish my business in town. Wait, Victoria said as he turned to leave. I do not even know how to thank you properly. You saved my life today, or at least saved me from something that might have been worse than death. I owe you everything. Jack's expression softened slightly. You do not owe me anything, he said. Just build yourself a good life. That will be thanks enough. He touched the brim of his hat in farewell and walked out, leaving Victoria standing in the boarding house entry, feeling as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Mrs. Calloway came around the desk and took Victoria's arm gently. Come along, dear. Let us get you settled and cleaned up. You have had a terrible day, and you need rest and food. Everything else can wait until tomorrow. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a patchwork quilt, a washstand with a porcelain basin and pitcher, and a single window that looked out over a surprisingly lush garden. Mrs. Calloway's daughter, a girl of about 16 named Sarah, brought up 2 buckets of hot water and a simple cotton dress in a faded blue color that looked like it would fit reasonably well. Victoria locked the door after they left and stripped off her dusty clothes with shaking hands. The hot water in the basin felt like heaven against her skin as she scrubbed away the grime and fear of the day. She washed her face and her long blonde hair, watching the dirty water swirl in the basin and wishing she could wash away the memory of her brother's betrayal as easily. When she was clean and dressed in the borrowed clothes, she sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to cry, great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. She cried for her parents, dead of influenza within days of each other. She cried for the home and life she had lost, for the brother who had chosen greed over family. She cried for the future that had been stolen from her and for the uncertain path that lay ahead. And finally, when the tears were spent, she lay down on the bed and fell into an exhausted sleep. Victoria woke to darkness and the sound of voices drifting up from downstairs. For a moment, she was disoriented, unsure where she was, but then the events of the day came flooding back. She lit the small oil lamp on the bedside table and saw that someone had left a tray of food by the door: bread and cheese, cold chicken, and a jar of water. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she had not eaten since early morning, and she devoured the simple meal with gratitude. The next morning, Victoria went downstairs to find the dining room full of boarders eating breakfast. Mrs. Calloway waved her over to an empty seat at the long table and brought her a plate of eggs and bacon with fresh biscuits and gravy. The other boarders were mostly men, miners and ranch hands and merchants, along with 2 other women who introduced themselves as school teachers from back east. Jack Sadler stopped by early this morning, Mrs. Calloway said when Victoria came to help clear the dishes. Left money for a full month instead of a week and said you might be looking for work. As it happens, my cook just quit to get married and moved to Denver. If you know your way around a kitchen, I could use the help. Pay is not much, but it includes room and board and tips from the grateful boarders. Victoria felt a surge of hope. I know how to cook, she said eagerly. My mother taught me, and I have been running a household for years. I can make bread and pies, roast meat, prepare vegetables, anything you need. Can you handle cooking for 20 people 3 times a day? I can try my best, and I am a quick learner. Mrs. Calloway smiled. Then you have got yourself a job, Miss Sutton. We will start you tomorrow morning. Today you should rest and get your bearings in town. Maybe see if the general store has any clothes that fit you better than Sarah's hand-me-downs. Victoria wanted to protest that she had no money for clothes, but Mrs. Calloway seemed to read her mind. I will advance you a week's wages, she said firmly. You can pay it back out of your earnings. A woman needs at least 2 decent dresses and some proper undergarments. Now go on, enjoy the sunshine while you can. September will be here before you know it, and then the cold will set in fierce. Victoria walked through Canon City with wonder, seeing it through new eyes now that she was no longer a prisoner waiting to be sold. The town sat in a valley surrounded by dramatic rocky cliffs and mountains, the Arkansas River running nearby with water still high from the mountain snowmelt. The streets were dusty but well laid out, with boardwalks in front of most establishments. She found the general store and used the money Mrs. Calloway had given her to purchase 2 simple calico dresses, one in dark green and one in brown, along with the necessary undergarments and a sturdy pair of shoes. As she was leaving the store, packages wrapped in brown paper under her arm, she nearly collided with a man coming in. She stepped back quickly, an apology on her lips, and found herself looking up at Jack Sadler. Miss Sutton, he said, surprise evident in his voice. How are you settling in? Very well, thanks to you, Victoria replied. Mrs. Calloway has given me a job as her cook. I will be able to support myself. Something that might have been pleasure flickered across Jack's face. That is good news, he said. Edna Calloway is tough but fair. You will do well there. They stood awkwardly for a moment, neither quite sure what to say. Victoria was intensely aware of how handsome Jack looked in the daylight, his face clean-shaven now, his dark hair visible beneath his hat. He had changed into cleaner clothes, though they were still the practical wear of a working cowboy. Sturdy pants, a cotton shirt, a leather vest. I wanted to thank you again, Victoria said, not just for yesterday, but for the room and the job and everything. You have been kinder to me than I had any right to expect from a stranger. You had every right to expect basic human decency, Jack said quietly. The fact that your own brother did not provide it does not mean you should lower your expectations of other people. Will you be staying in Canon City long? Victoria asked, surprised by how much she hoped the answer would be yes. Jack hesitated. I am not sure yet, he admitted. I came here to look at some land north of town, thinking I might settle down and start a ranch of my own. I have been working as a hired hand and horsebreaker for other people for 10 years now, and I have saved up enough to make a start on my own place. But I have not decided yet if this is where I want to put down roots. It seems like a good town, Victoria offered. Mrs. Calloway says the valley has good grazing land and water is reliable from the river and mountain streams. She is right about that, Jack agreed. And the railroad came through last year, which makes it easier to get cattle to market. It has potential. He paused, then added, maybe you could show me around town sometime. Point out the places worth knowing about. You have lived in the area, so you would know better than a newcomer like me. Victoria felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach, but she managed to smile. I would like that. I should warn you, though I have not been to town much in recent months. My brother preferred to keep me at the ranch. Jack's expression darkened briefly at the mention of Thomas, but he simply nodded. Even so, you know more than I do. How about tomorrow afternoon? I can meet you at the boarding house around 2 o'clock if that works with your schedule. That would be fine, Victoria said. Mrs. Calloway says I do not start work until the day after tomorrow, so I have time. They parted ways, and Victoria walked back to the boarding house with a strange lightness in her chest. For the first time since her parents died, she felt a spark of something that might have been hope. She had a job, a safe place to stay, and now the prospect of spending time with a man who had shown her extraordinary kindness. It was more than she had dared to dream possible just 24 hours ago. That evening, Victoria joined the other boarders for dinner and found herself drawn into easy conversation. The school teachers, Miss Patricia Reynolds and Miss Alice Warren, were full of stories about their students and the challenges of teaching in a frontier town. The miners talked about the silver strikes in the nearby mountains and the backbreaking work of extracting ore from the rock. A merchant named Mr. Davies discussed the difficulty of getting quality goods shipped from the east and the outrageous prices some suppliers tried to charge. Victoria listened more than she talked, soaking in the normalcy of it all. These were people going about their lives, working and planning and hoping for better things. They treated her with casual friendliness, not as property or a burden, but as just another person sharing a meal. It was a revelation. The next afternoon, Jack arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, riding a beautiful bay gelding and leading a gentle-looking mare. "I thought we might ride out to some of the spots around town," he explained. "Unless you would rather walk?" "I love riding," Victoria said honestly. "I have not been on a horse in weeks, though. My brother sold all of ours except the paint stallion, and he would never let me near that one." "This mare is very easygoing," Jack assured her. "Her name is Clover, and she could be ridden by a child. I borrowed her from the livery specifically because I thought she would suit you." Victoria changed into her split riding skirt, another purchase from the general store, and let Jack help her into the saddle. The feel of a horse beneath her again was wonderful, and she could not suppress a smile as they walked the horses down the main street and out toward the open land beyond town. Jack led them north along a well-worn trail that followed the river. The late August afternoon was warm but not oppressively hot, with a breeze coming down from the mountains that carried the scent of pine and sage. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, and Victoria found herself relaxing in a way she had not been able to do in months. "That is the land I am considering," Jack said eventually, pointing to a stretch of valley where the river curved through grassland backed by dramatic red rock formations. "About 300 acres with water rights and a small cabin that needs work. The owner is moving back east to be near his daughter and is willing to sell for a fair price." Victoria studied the land with an experienced eye. Her father had taught her to assess grazing quality and water access, practical knowledge that most women were not expected to have, but that he had considered essential. "It looks good," she said. "The grass is healthy, and having the river access is crucial. Those rock formations would provide windbreak in winter and shade in summer for the stock. Is there timber nearby for building and fencing?" Jack looked at her with evident surprise and approval. "There is pine forest about 2 miles east," he said. "I am impressed. Most people just see pretty scenery, but you looked at it like a rancher." "My father believed everyone on a ranch should understand the business," Victoria explained. "He taught me and Thomas both, though Thomas never paid much attention, too busy dreaming about easier ways to make money." They dismounted and walked along the riverbank, the horses grazing peacefully nearby. Jack talked about his plans for the ranch, starting with a small herd of cattle, maybe some horses for breeding and training. Building a proper house eventually, once he had established himself. It was clear he had thought through the details carefully, had been planning this for years. "What about you?" Jack asked. "What did you dream about before everything fell apart?" Victoria was quiet for a moment, surprised by the question. No one had asked her about her dreams in longer than she could remember. "I wanted to learn veterinary medicine," she admitted. "We had a neighbor who was a doctor, and he sometimes treated animals when there was no other option. He let me watch and help sometimes, and I found it fascinating. But there is no real training available for that, especially not for women, so it was just a dream." "Why especially not for women?" Jack asked. "It seems like good practical knowledge that would be useful on any ranch." Most people think women should not be involved in such things, Victoria said. Too messy, too complicated, too much like being a real doctor. My mother supported the idea, but she died before anything could come of it. Jack picked up a smooth river stone and skipped it across the water. Seems to me that practical knowledge is practical knowledge, regardless of who has it. If you are good at something useful, you should be able to do it. They stayed by the river for another hour, talking about everything and nothing. Jack told her about his years working ranches in Texas and New Mexico, the hard lessons he had learned about cattle and horses, and the men who worked with them. Victoria told him about growing up on the Colorado ranch, about her parents and their dreams for the future, about the painful months after they died when she watched everything slip away. When they finally rode back to town, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Jack helped Victoria dismount in front of the boarding house, his hands lingering at her waist, perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary. "Thank you for showing me around," he said, "and for the advice about the land. I think I am going to make an offer on it tomorrow." "I am glad," Victoria said sincerely. "I think you will build something good there." "Would you like to do this again?" Jack asked. "Maybe next week I could show you the property again once I have hopefully closed the deal?" "I would like that very much," Victoria replied. Over the following weeks, Victoria settled into her new life with surprising ease. She rose early each morning to prepare breakfast for the boarding house guests, spending her days in the kitchen baking bread and pies, preparing stews and roasts, learning the rhythms and requirements of feeding 20 hungry people 3 times a day. It was hard work, but satisfying in a way that her constrained life with Thomas had never been. Mrs. Calloway was demanding but fair, quick to correct mistakes, but equally quick to praise good work. Jack bought the land and threw himself into the work of establishing his ranch. He hired 2 men to help him repair the cabin and build a small barn, spending long days cutting timber and hauling supplies. Despite the heavy workload, he made time to visit Victoria at least twice a week, usually in the late afternoon when her kitchen duties were finished. Sometimes they walked through town, sometimes they rode out to his property so she could see his progress, and sometimes they simply sat in Mrs. Calloway's garden and talked. Victoria found herself thinking about Jack constantly, looking forward to his visits with an eagerness that both thrilled and frightened her. She had never felt this way about anyone before, had never had the opportunity given how isolated her life had been. Jack was everything she had never known she wanted, strong but gentle, ambitious but not greedy, confident but willing to listen and learn. He treated her as an equal, asking her opinion on everything from where to place fence lines to what kind of cattle to purchase. It was during one of these visits in mid-September that Jack first kissed her. They had ridden out to his ranch to see the completed barn, and Victoria had been effusive in her praise of his work. The building was solid and well constructed, with good ventilation and plenty of space for hay storage and horse stalls. Jack had shown her around with obvious pride, pointing out various features and explaining his reasoning. As they stood in the barn doorway watching the sunset, Jack had turned to her and said quietly, "Victoria, I need to tell you something." She had looked up at him, heart suddenly pounding, and he had continued, "I know we have only known each other a few weeks, but I cannot stop thinking about you. You are in my mind when I wake up and when I go to sleep. Every good thing that happens, I want to share it with you. Every problem I face, I wish I could talk it through with you. I am falling in love with you, and I needed you to know." Victoria had stared at him, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Jack had taken her silence for rejection and had started to turn away, but she had caught his hand. "I feel the same way," she had whispered. "I did not think I could trust anyone after what Thomas did, but you have shown me that not all men are like my brother. You have given me back my life and my hope, and somewhere along the way, I fell completely in love with you." Jack had cupped her face in his hands, his calloused thumbs brushing her cheekbones, and then he had kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, But when Victoria wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, it had deepened into something passionate and desperate, weeks of restrained feelings finally released. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jack had rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he had said. "I know it is fast. I know we should probably wait longer, but I do not want to wait. I want to build this life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. Marry me, Victoria." "Yes," she had said without hesitation. "Yes, absolutely yes." They had set the wedding for the first week of October, giving themselves enough time to make basic preparations, but not so long that the weather might turn bad. Mrs. Calloway had been delighted by the news and had insisted on hosting the reception at the boarding house. The school teachers had volunteered to help Victoria make a wedding dress, and several of Jack's new ranch hands had offered to help him finish work on the cabin so it would be properly ready for a wife. Victoria had written to Thomas, not to invite him but simply to inform him of her plans. She felt she owed him that much, if only to close that chapter of her life completely. He had not responded, and she had not expected him to. She heard through town gossip that he had lost more money gambling and had been forced to sell the ranch for a fraction of its value. He had left Colorado entirely, heading west to California in search of gold or some other unlikely fortune. Victoria felt nothing at the news, not anger or sadness or satisfaction, just a sort of empty relief that he was out of her life for good. The wedding took place on a crisp October morning, with blue skies and golden aspen leaves fluttering in the breeze. The ceremony was held at the small church in Canon City, with the minister who had known Victoria's parents presiding. Victoria wore a simple dress of cream-colored cotton that the school teachers had helped her make, with lace at the collar and cuffs. She carried wildflowers that Jack had picked that morning, purple asters and golden rabbit brush. Jack wore his best clothes, dark pants, and a white shirt with a string tie, his hair neatly combed and his face clean-shaven. When Victoria walked down the short aisle on the arm of Mr. Davies from the boarding house, who had volunteered to give her away, Jack's face had transformed with a smile that made Victoria's heart skip. The ceremony was brief and traditional. They exchanged vows in steady voices, Jack's hand warm and solid around hers. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Jack had kissed her with such tender devotion that several of the women in attendance had sighed audibly. The reception at the boarding house was a joyful affair. Mrs. Calloway had outdone herself with food and decorations, and it seemed half the town had turned out to celebrate. People who barely knew Jack and Victoria came to offer congratulations and well wishes, frontier hospitality at its finest. There was music and dancing, good food and laughter, and through it all, Jack kept Victoria close, his hand never far from hers. As evening approached, they said their goodbyes and rode out to the ranch together. Jack had spent the previous week making sure the cabin was as comfortable as possible for their wedding night. He had installed a proper bed frame and mattress, hung curtains at the windows, stocked the shelves with food and supplies. A fire was already burning in the stone fireplace, casting warm light across the single large room that served as kitchen, dining, and living area, with the bedroom partitioned off by a wooden wall. Jack carried Victoria across the threshold, both of them laughing at the old-fashioned gesture. He set her down gently and then just looked at her, his expression serious. "I promise you," he said quietly, "that I will spend every day for the rest of my life making sure you never regret this. I will work hard to build us a good life. I will respect you and listen to you and treat you as the partner you are. I will never, ever treat you as anything less than my equal." Victoria reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "I know," she said. "That is why I married you. Not because you saved me, though you did. Not because I needed security, though I did, but because I love you, Jack Sadler, with everything I am." Their wedding night was tender and passionate, an exploration of each other that left them both breathless and amazed. Jack was gentle and patient, making sure Victoria felt safe and cherished. When they finally fell asleep in each other's arms, the fire burning low in the hearth, Victoria felt more at peace than she had in years. The first months of marriage were an adjustment as they learned to live and work together. Victoria discovered that Jack snored when he slept on his back and that he liked his coffee strong enough to strip paint. Jack learned that Victoria sang while she cooked and that she had a stubborn streak a mile wide when she thought she was right about something. They had their first real argument in November over whether to invest in more cattle or save the money for building materials. Victoria had won that argument by presenting a detailed financial analysis that proved her point, and Jack had conceded with good grace and a kiss that had made her forget what they were arguing about. They worked together to build the ranch, spending long days mending fences, caring for the growing herd of cattle, breaking and training horses. Jack had been right about Victoria's natural skill with animals, and she proved to have a gift for gentle horse training that impressed even experienced cowboys. By spring, they had established a reputation for producing well-trained horses, and buyers were coming from as far away as Denver to see their stock. Victoria continued to develop her interest in veterinary medicine, reading every book she could find on the subject and practicing on their own animals. When a neighbor's valuable mare developed a difficult medical issue during foaling, Victoria had been able to intervene successfully, saving both mare and foal. Word spread, and soon people were asking for her help with their animals. She never charged for her services, considering it neighborly assistance, but grateful ranchers often showed their appreciation with gifts or by helping Jack with heavy ranch work. Their first winter together was hard, with brutal cold and heavy snows that tested both their preparations and their resilience. They spent long evenings by the fire, Jack repairing tack and equipment while Victoria sewed or read aloud from books they borrowed from the school teachers. Sometimes they just talked, sharing stories from their pasts, dreams for their future, thoughts on everything from politics to philosophy. Victoria discovered that Jack had a quiet intelligence and a dry sense of humor that made her laugh even on the hardest days. It was during that winter that Victoria realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had waited to be certain before telling Jack. When she finally shared the news one snowy evening in February, Jack had been overcome with emotion. He had held her close, his face buried in her hair, and she had felt his tears dampening her neck. "We are going to have a baby," he had whispered. "A family. I never thought I would have this, Victoria. After my sister died, after all those hard years, I thought this kind of happiness was not meant for people like me." "You deserve every bit of happiness," Victoria had said fiercely. "And we are going to raise this child with all the love and security we never had. He or she is going to know every single day that they are wanted and cherished." The pregnancy progressed normally through the spring and into the summer. Victoria continued working on the ranch as long as she could, finally limiting herself to lighter tasks as her belly grew. Jack became almost comically protective, worrying about her constantly, making sure she rested enough and ate well. Mrs. Calloway came out to visit regularly, bringing supplies and advice from her own experiences raising children. Their son was born on a sweltering afternoon in August of 1879, almost exactly 1 year after the day Victoria had stood on an auction block, believing her life was over. The labor was long and difficult, attended by Mrs. Calloway and the town doctor whom Jack had insisted on hiring despite the expense. When Victoria finally held her newborn son, red-faced and squalling, she had wept with joy and relief. They named him James Michael Sadler, James after Jack's father, and Michael after Victoria's. Baby James had Jack's dark hair and blue-gray eyes, and from the beginning, he had his father's stubborn determination. He was a fussy baby who did not sleep well and demanded constant attention, but neither parent minded. Jack would walk the floor with James for hours at night, singing soft cowboy lullabies in his rough voice, while Victoria watched from the bed with a heart so full she thought it might burst. Life settled into a new rhythm with a baby in the house. The ranch continued to prosper, and by James's first birthday, they were able to start construction on a larger house. Jack designed it carefully with Victoria's input, making sure there was a large kitchen for her, a study where she could keep her veterinary books and supplies, and bedrooms enough for the larger family they both hoped to have. Victoria had been nervous about becoming pregnant again so soon, but her body surprised her by cooperating. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1881, an easier birth than James had been. They named her Caroline Rose, and she was everything her brother was not: calm, sweet, tempered, content to sleep for hours in her cradle. James, now a rambunctious toddler, was fascinated by his baby sister and insisted on helping with everything. The new house was completed that summer, a substantial two-story structure with a wraparound porch and real glass windows. Victoria cried when Jack carried her across the threshold, remembering the small cabin where they had started their married life and marveling at how far they had come. They hosted a housewarming party that drew neighbors from miles around, and the celebration lasted until well after dark. As the years passed, the ranch continued to grow. Jack and Victoria expanded their cattle operation and became known throughout Colorado for their quality horses. Victoria's reputation as a skilled animal doctor grew as well, and she eventually began charging modest fees for her services, money that she carefully saved and invested. They hired permanent ranch hands to help with the growing workload, and Victoria took pride in making sure they were treated fairly and paid well. James grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved working alongside his father, learning everything he could about ranching and horses. Caroline was more interested in books and learning, and Victoria encouraged her daughter's curiosity, teaching her to read and write and calculate. When a proper school was established in Canon City, both children attended, riding in with Jack when he had business in town. In 1884, Victoria gave birth to their third child, another boy they named Robert Daniel. He was a happy baby who laughed easily and rarely cried, bringing joy to the entire household. With three children, the house was constantly filled with noise and activity, and Victoria sometimes felt overwhelmed by the chaos. But Jack was a devoted father and partner, always ready to help with childcare and household tasks without being asked. One evening in late 1885, after the children were finally asleep and the house was quiet, Jack and Victoria sat together on the porch swing watching the stars. It was a warm autumn night, comfortable and peaceful, and Victoria leaned against Jack's shoulder with a contented sigh. "Do you remember the day we met?" Jack asked softly. 7 years ago in August." "Every detail," Victoria replied. "I remember thinking my life was over, that I had no future worth living. And then you stepped in and changed everything." "I have never regretted it for a single moment," Jack said. "Best $25 I ever spent." He paused, then added seriously, "Though I would have paid 1,000 times that if necessary." Victoria turned to look at him, taking in his face in the starlight. He was 32 now, still strong and handsome, but with fine lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. His hands were calloused and scarred from hard work, but they were always gentle when they touched her or their children. "I used to wonder why you did it," Victoria said. "I understood about your sister, but it still seemed like such an enormous risk to take for a complete stranger. What if I had been terrible? What if I had caused you nothing but trouble?" Jack was quiet for a moment, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "I looked into your eyes that day in the square," he said finally, "and I saw someone who was terrified but still fighting, still hoping for something better. I saw strength and dignity even in the worst circumstances. I figured anyone with that much courage was worth saving. And then I got to know you, and I discovered you were not just worth saving, you were worth everything." "I love you so much," Victoria whispered. "More than I ever knew it was possible to love someone." "I love you too," Jack replied. "You and those three troublemakers asleep upstairs are my entire world. Everything I do for you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, cattle lowing in the distance, the soft nickering of horses in the barn, crickets singing in the grass. It was a life they had built together from nothing, a family created through love and hard work and determination. In the years that followed, that love only deepened. Their children grew strong and healthy, each developing their own personalities and interests. James eventually took over much of the daily ranch operation, showing the same dedication and work ethic as his father. Caroline discovered a love of teaching and began helping at the Canon City school, with dreams of eventually attending normal school to become a certified teacher. Robert showed an early aptitude for working with horses that even exceeded his mother's natural skill. Victoria's veterinary practice expanded to the point where she was often called to ranches across the region to deal with complicated cases. She became known as one of the most skilled animal doctors in Colorado, despite having no formal training. She kept meticulous notes on her cases and treatments and eventually compiled them into a comprehensive manual that other ranchers found invaluable. A publisher in Denver expressed interest in printing it as a book, and though Victoria was hesitant at first, Jack encouraged her to pursue it. The book, titled Practical Veterinary Medicine for Western Ranchers, was published in 1889 to positive reviews and steady sales. Victoria received letters from ranchers, veterinarians, and even university professors praising her clear writing and practical approach. It was a validation of everything she had taught herself, proof that her dreams of contributing to veterinary medicine had not been as impossible as she once thought. Jack continued to build their ranch into one of the most successful operations in the region. He was respected by his neighbors and employees alike for his fairness and integrity. He never forgot his own hard years as a hired hand, and he made sure the men who worked for him were treated with dignity and paid fairly. Several of his ranch hands eventually saved enough to buy their own land, and Jack helped them get started, offering advice and sometimes financial assistance. In 1892, Victoria gave birth to their fourth and final child, a daughter they named Martha Elizabeth. The pregnancy had been unexpected, as Victoria was now 34 and had assumed her childbearing years were behind her. But Martha was healthy and strong, and she quickly became the darling of the family. Her older siblings doted on her, and Jack joked that she would be completely spoiled by the time she could walk. As Martha grew, the Sadler Ranch continued to thrive. They had weathered economic downturns and harsh winters, droughts, and cattle diseases, but Jack and Victoria's partnership had proven unshakable. They made decisions together, supported each other through difficulties, and celebrated successes as a team. Their marriage had become a model for others in the community, proof that real partnership between husband and wife was possible even in the male-dominated world of Western ranching. One afternoon in the summer of 1895, Jack and Victoria rode out to the spot by the river where Jack had first shown her the land 17 years earlier. The property had expanded significantly since then, now encompassing over 1,000 acres with prime grazing and water rights. But this original piece remained special to them both, the place where their life together had really begun. They sat in the shade of a cottonwood tree, the same tree where they had sheltered during that first visit. Their horses grazed nearby, and the river burbled over rocks, the sound soothing and eternal. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Victoria asked. "If you had walked past that day, if someone else had been there instead?" "All the time," Jack admitted. "And it terrifies me to think about it. Not just for me, but for you. What would have happened to you if I had not been there?" "Someone else would have helped," Victoria said, though she did not quite believe it. "Or I would have found another way." "Maybe," Jack said. "But I am grateful every day that I was there, that I had the chance to know you and love you and build this life with you. You have given me everything I never knew I needed." Victoria looked at her husband, this man who had bought her freedom and then given her his heart. His hair was starting to gray at the temples now, and there were deeper lines on his face, but to her he was as handsome as the day they met. More so, actually, because now she knew the depth of his character, the strength of his devotion, the constancy of his love. "You saved me," she said simply. "In every way a person can be saved. And then you loved me, and that made all the difference." Jack pulled her close, and they sat together under the cottonwood tree, the river flowing past, the mountains rising in the distance. It was a perfect moment, a crystallization of years of love and partnership and family. Their children grew and eventually began lives of their own. James married a rancher's daughter from Pueblo and took over managing the Sadler Ranch, implementing new techniques and expanding operations even further. Caroline attended normal school in Denver as she had dreamed, returned to teach in Canon City, and married a doctor who shared her passion for education and helping others. Robert, after years of working with horses, established his own training operation on land Jack helped him purchase, quickly earning a reputation as one of the finest horse trainers in the state. Only Martha, the youngest, remained at home as she grew through her teenage years. She showed an interest in both ranching and her mother's veterinary work, riding out with Victoria on calls and learning everything she could. Victoria saw in her youngest daughter a reflection of her own younger self, that combination of practical skill and intellectual curiosity that had once seemed like an impossible dream. In the spring of 1900, as the new century began, Jack and Victoria celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary. Their children organized a grand party at the ranch, inviting friends and neighbors from across the region. Mrs. Calloway, now in her 70s but still sharp and energetic, attended with many of the people who had been at their original wedding. The school teachers, both long since retired, made the trip from Denver where they had relocated. As Jack and Victoria stood together greeting guests, Victoria was overwhelmed by the outpouring of love and respect. These were people whose lives they had touched over the years, employees they had treated fairly, neighbors they had helped during hard times, students Caroline had taught, ranchers whose animals Victoria had healed. It was a testament to the life they had built, not just for themselves, but for their community. During the celebration, Jack stood to make a toast. He raised his glass and looked at Victoria with such love that several people in the crowd sighed audibly, just as they had at the wedding 25 years before. 25 years ago, Jack said, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd, I met a woman standing in a town square, and I made the best decision of my life. I gave her freedom, and in return, she gave me everything. She gave me love and partnership. She gave me 4 incredible children. She gave me a home and a life worth living. Victoria, you have been my partner, my best friend, my greatest joy. Here's to 25 more years together, and may they be even better than the last. Victoria felt tears streaming down her face as she stood and moved to Jack's side. He wrapped his arm around her waist, and she raised her own glass. Jack Sadler saw me on the worst day of my life and chose kindness, she said, her voice trembling but strong. He gave me freedom and then showed me what it meant to be truly free, to be valued and respected and loved. Every good thing in my life came from that choice he made. I love you, Jack, with everything I am and everything I will ever be. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers, and Jack kissed her soundly to even louder approval. The party continued into the evening, with music and dancing and storytelling that stretched late into the night. Their grandchildren, James's 2 young sons, ran wild through the house, and Martha supervised them with the patient exasperation of a young aunt. As the last guests were leaving and the cleanup was beginning, Victoria stepped out onto the porch for a moment of quiet. Jack found her there, as she had known he would, and joined her at the railing. Quite a day, he said softly. Quite a life, Victoria replied. I never imagined, standing in that square 22 years ago, that I could end up here, with you, with our children, with all of this. It seemed impossible. Nothing is impossible when you find the right partner, Jack said. We did it together, Victoria. Everything we built as a team. They stood together in the darkness, looking out over the land that had become their home, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling for the night. Inside, their children and grandchildren were laughing and talking, the house full of love and life. The years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of ranch life. Jack and Victoria gradually reduced their daily workload as James took on more responsibility for operations. They spent their time traveling occasionally, visiting their scattered children and growing collection of grandchildren. Victoria continued her veterinary work, but became more selective, taking only the most interesting or challenging cases. Jack remained involved in local politics and served on the school board, using his influence to improve education opportunities for all children in the region. In 1905, Martha married a young veterinarian who had read Victoria's book and traveled to Colorado specifically to meet the famous author. He and Martha made a perfect pair, establishing a formal veterinary practice in Canon City that served both ranch animals and the increasing number of household pets in town. Victoria was thrilled to see her daughter pursuing the dream that she herself had once thought impossible. Jack and Victoria's relationship remained strong through the inevitable challenges of aging. When Jack injured his back during a fall from a horse in 1907, Victoria nursed him through months of recovery with the same dedication she brought to her veterinary work. When Victoria developed pneumonia during the harsh winter of 1909, Jack sat by her bedside day and night, reading to her and coaxing her to eat until she regained her strength. They grew old together with grace and gratitude, never taking for granted the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them together. Every anniversary, they made a pilgrimage to the spot by the river where Jack had first shown Victoria the land, sitting under the same cottonwood tree and remembering how it all began. On a warm evening in August of 1913, 35 years after the day they met, Jack and Victoria sat on their porch watching the sunset. Jack was 60 years old now, his hair completely gray, but his eyes still the same startling blue-gray that had captivated Victoria from the beginning. Victoria was 55, her blonde hair streaked with silver, her face lined but still beautiful. "Do you have any regrets?" Victoria asked, a question she had posed periodically throughout their marriage. Jack considered it seriously, as he always did. "I regret that I could not save my sister," he said quietly. "I regret the years I spent alone before I found you. But everything from the day we met until now, every moment of our life together, I would not change a single thing." "Not even the hard times?" Victoria pressed. "The drought of '86? The year we almost lost everything?" "Not even those," Jack said firmly, "because we faced them together, and they made us stronger. The hard times taught us what we could endure, showed us what we had built. I would not trade that for an easier path." Victoria reached over and took his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of decades of practice. "I used to think my life ended the day Thomas sold me," she said. "But it really began the day you set me free. Everything good in my life, everything I am proud of, came from that moment. You gave me myself, Jack. That is the greatest gift anyone ever gave me." "You gave yourself," Jack corrected gently. "I just removed the obstacles in your way. Everything you became, everything you accomplished, that was all you. I just got to be there watching, supporting, cheering you on." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank behind the mountains and the first stars appeared. The ranch was quiet, the work of the day completed, the animals settled for the night. Inside the house, they could hear Martha and her husband discussing a medical case, their voices carrying through the open windows. It was a perfect moment, ordinary and extraordinary all at once. Jack and Victoria would have many more such moments over the years that followed. They lived to see their grandchildren grow and begin families of their own, adding great-grandchildren to the Sadler clan. The ranch continued to prosper under James's management, and the family name became synonymous with quality and integrity throughout Colorado. Victoria's veterinary manual went through several editions, each updated with new techniques and knowledge. She became a consultant to the newly established veterinary school at Colorado State, invited to lecture despite her lack of formal credentials. Her practical experience and careful documentation proved more valuable than any diploma. Jack remained active in community affairs, his opinion sought on everything from water rights to political candidates. He never lost the fundamental decency that had led him to intervene on Victoria's behalf so many years ago, and his reputation for fairness and integrity was unmatched. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1928, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. The ranch threw a massive celebration that drew people from across the state, a testament to the impact Jack and Victoria had made on their community. At 75 and 68, respectively, they were both still healthy and active, still devoted to each other with a depth that inspired everyone who knew them. Jack lived to the age of 82, passing peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1935, with Victoria at his side. She held his hand as his breathing slowed and stopped, her tears falling silently as she said goodbye to the man who had been her salvation and her love for 57 years. The funeral drew hundreds of mourners, and Victoria was touched by the stories people shared about Jack's kindness, his integrity, his impact on their lives. Victoria lived for 5 more years, spending her remaining time with her children and the ever-growing collection of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She continued to work with Martha in the veterinary practice, her expertise still valuable despite her advanced age. She wrote a memoir at her family's urging, detailing her remarkable life from the auction block in Canon City to the thriving ranch and family she had built with Jack. The memoir was published in 1939 and became a regional bestseller, inspiring countless readers with its message of resilience, hope, and the transformative power of love. Victoria donated all proceeds to a scholarship fund for young women pursuing veterinary medicine, ensuring that future generations would have the opportunities she had fought so hard to create for herself. Victoria Sadler passed away quietly in her sleep in the autumn of 1940 at the age of 82. She was buried beside Jack on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, their graves marked by a simple stone that read Jack and Victoria Sadler, partners in life and love, together forever. The ranch remained in the family, passed down through generations who never forgot the story of how it all began. The tale of Victoria's brother selling her for a horse and saddle, and the cowboy who bought her only to set her free, became a family legend told to each new generation. It was a story of courage and kindness, of love triumphing over cruelty, of two people who found each other in the worst circumstances and built something beautiful that lasted far beyond their lifetimes. The land Jack had first shown Victoria by the river remained part of the ranch, the old cottonwood tree still standing strong. Family members would sometimes visit the spot, sitting in its shade and remembering the couple who had started it all. The river still flowed as it always had, constant and eternal, a fitting symbol for a love that had proven unshakable through every challenge life could offer. In the end, what had begun as an act of desperate cruelty had become something transcendent. Thomas Sutton's attempt to sell his sister had inadvertently brought together two people who would create a legacy of love, family, and community that touched countless lives. Jack's simple act of kindness, stepping forward when others looked away, had not just saved one woman, but had created ripples that spread far and wide. Their love story became a testament to the power of human decency, the possibility of redemption, and the extraordinary things that can happen when one person chooses to do the right thing. It was a reminder that our darkest moments can sometimes lead to our greatest joys, and that true love, when nurtured with respect and partnership, can withstand anything. The Sadler Ranch continued to thrive into the modern era, a monument to everything Jack and Victoria had built together. Their descendants carried forward their values of hard work, fairness, and compassion, ensuring that the legacy of that day in Canon City would never be forgotten. Visitors to the family cemetery on the hill could still see the stone marking Jack and Victoria's resting place, and many would pause there, touched by the simple inscription and the powerful story it represented. It was a love story for the ages, born in the Wild West of 1878, forged through hardship and joy, and lasting long after both participants had passed on. It proved that sometimes the most unlikely beginnings can lead to the most beautiful endings, that freedom given freely is returned 1,000-fold in love, and that two people who truly commit to being partners can build something that lasts forever.